The COVID comeback, as in come on back to work. That's what we're doing today. We're talking about that, right? The COVID comeback, as in come back to work, but coming back to work may not be the same as what it was. So, what's the difference between the comeback to work for some, anyway, in the workforce as it was than it was before? And now, what's it going to be? So, this is Rich and Maikel with Mainline Executive Coaching, ACT. ACT as in action. ACT is also an acronym for and cultural transformation. And that's what we are talking about today. It is definitely about cultural transformation, how leaders change and can change and maybe even must change in leading their organizations going forward. We have with us Dirk Van Der Vaart with us again. He is one of a genuinely outstanding executive coach and talented executive in his own pedigree, in his own background. He is one of John's great ILC coaches here. And so we welcome you, Dirk. Let's start here with, we had a little bit of conversation about, tell us your take on the post-pandemic workforce and coming back and all that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And first and foremost, thanks for having me here. As you said, I've had the opportunity to share some time with you and your listeners before, and it's been a great time. So I'm really excited to be back with you guys in the studio and with your listeners out there. So great times. Yeah. So this is kind of a big mouthful, right? That we're talking about here. This come back to work, and what does come back to work mean? Let me take a step back before the pandemic happened. And if you go back and look about 2 to 3 years ago, in all the literature around leadership and culture within the workplace, there started to be a trend and there started to be a big shift in what work environments and what work really meant. And it really is wrapped up in this idea of social justice or social welfare. One might even say wokeism to a certain extent, but what does that really mean, right? What that research was showing is that from an employee, okay, let's talk about employees, not necessarily leaders, but from an employee perspective, what began to become more important than salary or corporate profits or corporate success was this notion of, does my company do good things? Is my work valuable and meaningful work? And second, am I appreciated and valued? Not necessarily always rewarded, although that's a component, but am I appreciated and valued and recognized for my contribution to that valuable and good work, right? The pandemic now, because it forced everyone to spend a year sitting at home and working remotely, really shone a huge spotlight on that. And it caused this complete shift in how we perceive what it means to go to work. We all started looking more and more like gig workers, right? We were happily sitting at our kitchen tables and, in our spare bedrooms doing our job. And in many cases, we found out not only could we do it really well, but in some cases we could do it even better. And productivity rose during this pandemic for a lot of organizations. But it really signifies a not so subtle shift in who we need to be as leaders, given that mentality and that cultural shift. And to put it in a nutshell, guys like the three of us, and we're all got, some of our listeners aren't seeing us, but hearing us, I don't mind saying we've all got a lot of gray on our faces and on our heads, right? So we come from an older generation that was really trained in your job as a leader is all about shareholder value, right? Get those results, increase that margin, get productivity, constant growth, right? All of us that had profit and loss responsibility, you were measured really on, are you growing? Are you getting 30% EBITDA? Are you getting market share increases? Is your profitability going up? And that's what we would hammer into the workforce, right? We'd show them these reports, we'd show them the graphs and say, hey guys, we're off our numbers this month, this week, this quarter. And we'd crack the whip and say, we gotta get these numbers up. We got to do better. And if somebody wasn't cutting it, boy, it didn't take very long before out the door they went saying, hey, buddy, you're not producing. We tied our salaries to it. We tied our variable comp to it. Everything was about producing this result. And what we're seeing now, more so than ever as a result of COVID, is that as leaders, we need to figure out how to access that result, but by being more human, by leading more from the heart than from the head. And how do we engage our employees and get them to believe and get them to be cognizant that they're part of an organization that does important work and that they are important contributors to that work? And if we can do that successfully, the numbers and all the other stuff comes. It's a result. It's an outcome of having that engaged, charged, motivated workforce. And the tools that we need to use to create that today in the come back to work environment, I believe, are vastly different than the tools we used maybe 18 months ago. And so that's a long way around the barn, but I think that's at the heart of what I think is a complete paradigm shift for leadership in the post-pandemic world.
Yeah, I would say it has been a complete paradigm shift. I absolutely agree with you. And we are working with a different generation that has a different paradigm about work and life and so on. And so there's probably people that are listening to us and going, yeah, that's exactly right. And there's other people going, what is that all about? What are we even talking about here, right? There's some of that stuff going on. So here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to start moving and massaging this discussion a little bit. And so I'm going to ask Rich this. You are a guy who came out of manufacturing, was manufacturing, medical manufacturing for a lot of years, did a lot of good work leading your teams, being very, very successful, have an incredible record, a performance record over those years. Help us to start understanding this idea of the numbers and then start moving us in the direction of numbers and data and all that stuff. You know, how does that then start happening now with the relationships between employees and employees and employees and leaders and all that kind of stuff?
Well, I think Dirk hit it on the head with a couple of the issues he talked about, how, you know, kind of the old school thought was just simply numbers driven organizations. And now, you know, you see a lot of data. There's so much data out there available. It's what you do with that data and who's going to do it. You know, I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Numbers-driven organizations, you know, the value of their data is based simply on the data alone, the numbers. Where a data-driven organization would be more somebody that's going to take that data and really come to some, you know, some conclusions, some insights on the data. They're going to come to some why did we get this data versus simply this is where we're at. You know, presentations and discussions with numbers-driven organizations going to be focused on that metric, those numbers, where data-driven organizations are going to want to come to conclusions. They're going to make decisions and come to actions and find out who is the best teammates, who's the best, you know, the people. How can we engage everybody to get this data and find out the conclusions? You know, here's the other thing too, is numbers-driven organizations, and I'm going to use the term managers and leaders, okay? Mm-hmm. Managers are focused simply on that specific number. The biggest fear is being able to hit that number. Mm-hmm. And whereas with, you know, data-driven organizations, you know, the fear is not the number, it's not being able to come up with a clear solution, you know, and where that number come from and how can we drive that forward. And so there's a lot of different mindsets around this. Here's the thing, there may even be a one-off where some of these numbers-driven organizations are going to hit their numbers. And, you know, all this backslapping, and, you know, we talked about this, you know, bigger plaques on the outside of their door, big bonuses for management, whatever. But there's no real understanding of how they got to those numbers. Mm-hmm. And so they're going to raise that bar because we hit it now, so let's hit it next time, with no clear understanding how they got there and how they're going to improve. So it really comes down to, like Dirk said, how can we as leaders help these individuals in our organization feel like we're actually doing something. We're including them. We're bigger than just a Zoom, you know, screen, virtual screen where everybody's working at home. How are we bigger than this? You know, there's a big paradigm shift, and it becomes the difference between a manager and a leader. It really does. Management skills, okay, you look at all these numbers. What are you going to do with those numbers as a leader?
Yep. Well, you know, it's an interesting thing. Managers are put in those managerial positions for a reason. I mean, they really are. They are the drivers of those numbers. So we can't say that managers are like the bad guys because
no, absolutely not. That's what they're taught to do, and everybody's got to have those skills to be in that position.
Yeah.
But it's growing beyond that. Actually taking that to the next level is the trick.
I think there's kind of something going on here that it's not a one-way learning street. I've watched in organizations where younger generation has come in and they've had this. I kind of some ways see, and I may be mistaken about this, Dirk, and you can correct me if I'm mistaken, is kind of this collegial, we're doing good things and, we're belonging and we want to feel part of, and there's that kind of collegial feeling about all of that. And, I want to be able to pick my perks, and I've got my chits that I got, here's what when do you want to come in late? When do you want to have time off, and blah, blah. There's that whole kind of realm of I want to be in charge of my work time, right? Mm-hmm. There's that. And you got so many chits, you can't do it all, but you get to select some, right?
Yep.
So I've watched in a couple of organizations as they've come in, and there has been this kind of head scratching from upper management going, how do we help them? It's that kind of, how do we help them kind of going on?
Yep.
What I see on the other side of that is there is this reality that kind of takes place in that, yes, we want you here. We want you to feel like you belong, that you're making a contribution, that you're part of an exceptional company, and that you really are making a difference here. And then there's at some point, it's like, you can work here anytime you want, so long as you get the work done. You can't miss the targets. That's a reality. You can't miss the objectives. You got to have a certain level of standard about your work and the expectations of your work. And so that for some is something they fit in pretty easily. But others, there's kind of a dissonance about that. And I've watched kids that are very talented kind of thinking, I can just kind of do it my way. But once they've been in there, all of a sudden they are working hard. And there's something, it's two-sided kind of thing here, I think. And that is, I want to kind of do it my way and go climb mountains and da-da-da-da-da. And you can do that as long as you show up and you work hard. You cannot get away from the work hard. You cannot get away from the ambition. There's a sense of conscientiousness and diligence and working hard and working with the team. Those are real things. So as I take a look at what you're talking about here, it kind of looks like it's all on the leader's part to be able to see things and work with people in a different kind of way. We call that being agile and pivoting and moving in a lot of different positions as you're working with your people. And at the same time, there's this necessity of the employee responding or reciprocating.
Yes.
It's almost more like a dance. It's not like I'm just laying the gun down and this is the way I want it. There's a whole lot of give and take in that whole process. And I think what you're bringing to us is that the wisdom of leaders has become a lot broader, has become a lot deeper, has become a lot more thorough. It's, as you said in our conversation, you take a look at a lot of these leaders, the things that they don't particularly do really, really well on is relationship building. Mm-hmm. They're not really particularly good at creativity and communication. Yeah. They kind of lack in those areas, which would also indicate that whole thing about data and da. So how then do we do it? Let me ask you this question, because we had an outline, but I think we're going in kind of a different direction. Dirk, you've been in those positions. You've held those kinds of positions. You've worked with those kind of people. What is it that you do to help, number one, get their attention? This is an important pivot, not only for you in your career as a leader, it's also an important pivot in your organization and your teams. That this isn't something that's just theoretical. This is kind of a new world in which you're operating. How can I help you see it? And how can I help you get there?
Yeah, that's a awesome question, Maikel. And my suspicion is if the three of us really got into this, we'd probably be writing a book, because there's a whole lot of meat on this bone, right? So there's a lot to unpack here in the short time that we've been allotted in this format. So let me get to two main points that I think speak to what you're asking, and I'll attack it from the what and then the how, right? So the what. most people that are in executive leadership positions, unless it's a family business and they happen to inherit the position because they're a member of the family, most of us leaders got to our leadership positions because we're pretty good at what we do and we have a pretty broad tool set of things that we can access that most others either don't or haven't, and that's why we're leaders and others aren't, right? So what it comes down to, the what is, as leaders, now we've got to learn to pick up and use tools that are in our toolbox that we don't normally gravitate to, right? All of us have a set of tools in our toolbox. Some of those tools are dominant. In other words, when we're faced with uncertainty or when we're faced with stress or we have to make a decision, we're likely to grab that tool first, whether or not it's the most appropriate tool for what you're trying to do. All right, let's take that Tim the Tool Man a little further. If my dominant trait as a leader is the hammer, regardless of what situation I'm confronted with, the first thing I'm going to reach into my box and pull out is a hammer, and I'm going to use that hammer, right? I'm going to start hammering things. But maybe it's a Phillips head screw. And what I should have done is reached in and got my Phillips head screwdriver and started turning instead of beating, right? That's a long stretch, but I hope the listeners are staying with me on this. So that's the what. We've got to learn to access different tools in our toolbox that we all have that maybe we don't ordinarily do naturally. The how is, today, leadership, I think, requires a much greater degree of self-awareness than we've ever had to have before as leaders, right? We have to have the internal, some people refer to this as emotional intelligence, perhaps. We like to call it intelligent leadership here at ILEC. But really what it comes down to is being able to look within yourself, understand what are the elements of my character that drive how I think, how I view the world, how I react to situations. How I think and how I react is what governs my emotion, how I feel, and how I feel drives how I behave. That's how I show up in my leadership capacity. The only thing my team sees is how I behave, right? And if I want to change how I behave and I want to change my impact on my team, I have to have a deeper understanding of how I think and feel than I've ever had before. Right. And so that's really what this paradigm is coming about in terms of leading in the new reality, is you've got to learn to access those tools that are not intrinsic to the kind of school of leadership that most of us have come up and through. And I'm going to make a shameless pitch here and say the best way to do that is work with an executive coach like the three of us, because we've got the tools and we can help executives work through a very structured process for arriving at that level of self-understanding that then says, hey, when I'm in that board meeting and something pops up that I wasn't expecting, instead of grabbing the hammer, I'll be like, oh, wait a minute, this one needs a wrench. And I'll grab the wrench instead, and I will have a much more positive and much more transformational impact as a leader than I would have had if I was an old school leader, grabbed my hammer and started flailing away with it, right? Yeah. So
the thing here about is this. Everybody, there was a study done about how much people think they are self-aware. How much are they really aware? 90% of the people thought, I'm pretty doggone aware. I really am. And they went back and they asked some deeper questions about all that. And they found, no, actually, you're not. It's probably like 80% are not aware. And on a good day, maybe 15% are actually aware.
Yeah.
So bringing it back now, because I think that's part of it. The idea of this of being, humility and teachable and courageous and brave and all those things, to step out of just using the hammer to drive the results, right?
Yep.
So there's more tools there. So there's no possibilities. The first thing is to be able to say, maybe I'm not getting the results that I want. Maybe looking at turnover, maybe looking at motivation in my company, maybe looking at seeing the team and how the team is actually working. Look at those indicators that are telling you that you may not want to see, that you may not want to own up to, because, at some point it does come back to you, right? So then the key thing is say, if I'm not getting what I want and I'm not seeing clearly what it is that I'm doing, I may need another pair of eyes.
Mm-hmm.
That's maybe what's really going on here. And that's a brave move. That's a courageous move. So Rich, pick that up and say, okay, I am a serious guy or a serious gal. I want to do well in my role. I want my teams and organization to do well. Something's missing. I don't know what it is. And I'm going to call you up and you're going to tell me what.
Okay. Well, I'm going to tell you that you've put the cart before the horse. What you've done, a lot of people really focus on those things that people see in us. Communication skills, team building skills, strategic thinking, all those things that really, on the outside, people see in us as a leader. And so there's a lot of books out there, a lot of seminars, name it, that you can go out and you can really focus on those things. But the problem is you've put, like I said, you put the cart before the horse, because it's really your character, your values, your beliefs, your inner core that drives and ignites that outer core. So it's really learning who you are inside first. And not so much your personality. Well, your personality, yes, but the personality traits that are driving your leadership skills, those things that everybody sees on the outside. And so the focus needs to be, who am I on the inside? What is my leadership skills? What's really driving, those things that everybody are seeing? And so that's where we can step in and really help with certain assessments and driving down to that inner core and helping people understand this is who you are. This is what's driving your leadership abilities, and this is where you need to work on in order to develop those skills. You can't just go out there and say, well, I read a book on communication skills. This is what I got to do, and I'm going to get better. It doesn't work that way, because internally, unless you fix what's going on internally and understand what's going on internally, that external circle is not going to fire. It's not going to ignite. And I think that's where a lot of people get that wrong. A lot of folks are getting that wrong nowadays. And so there's a big drive and a big focus on the inner core. And that's really where we start. And it's part of that, prescription without diagnosis is malpractice. And it works with coaching as well. The one thing I want to touch on real quick is something that, Dirk talked about, is titles and leadership abilities. I got to say to people out there, be careful what you wish for, because you just might get it. And if you're not ready, you're going to be in a world of hurt, because being a leader it's a great thing. But remember, along with that title comes a tremendous amount of responsibility for the people around you. You can impact that person's entire career path, those people that work for you, if you're not, positively or negatively. You can and stepping into that title, if you're not ready, you can, send yourself down the wrong path for your career. Yep. So like I said, and I laugh because everybody's got to have a title nowadays. There's a title, everybody's got a title. But, like I said, with that title comes a great deal of responsibility. And it's learning from someone who's been there, done that, been successful at it, and can help you to the next level is going to be key to your career path.
Yeah. There's something very special that happens. And I know John laughs at that word. It's so special. You're so special. Helping everybody, calm down and get humble there, right? Right. That a lot. But there's something maybe unique about working with a leader, and they're at a pivotal point in their career, and they're just not seeing it. They're just not getting it. And they're at this point where they've got to make the right decision about what it is they're going to do next. And knowing that individual so well and being able to just say, if you just looked at it this way, if you just took this kind of thing, how about if we just did this, and they're not sure about it. And then they go and do the thing. They test out the thing that you see clearly as a coach that they're not seeing. And then they come back and they said, it worked. Mm. And it made all the difference in their career from that point on. Yeah. They couldn't see it. They're bright. They're talented. Some of these folks are absolutely brilliant. But because you're brilliant doesn't mean that you see it all or that you get it all. Everybody needs to be able to step back and have somebody there saying, how about this? Have you thought about that? Yeah. What if we just did it a little bit differently? And that's really that relationship that can happen with the best coaches and the most open kinds of leaders. Something magical happens that would never have happened otherwise.
Yeah.
All right, Dirk, if they want to get a hold of you, you're an impressive guy. Who wouldn't want to talk to you?
Right.
How do they do it?
The easiest way is dirkvandervaart.com. And everything you'll want to know, it will pop up there. And I believe that in post-production, we can add some of those links to the podcast. But again, it's Dirk, D-I-R-K, last name Van Der, V-A-A-R-T. The second A is for awesome. Don't forget that one. But dirkvandervaart.com, and that'll take you to my website, and all my contact is there. And it'll link you to the greater ILEC community, where you can find information on fantastic coaches like Rich and yourself. So pretty easy. Yeah.
I really like Dirk.
You're not going to get an inspired guy. You're going to get a funny guy. Got to have some laughs in there, right? Okay.
Yeah, I moonlight as a stand-up comedian, right? So.
Oh, really? Okay, rounding third. Bring us home, Rich.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Dirk, that was awesome. Always a pleasure talking to you. I always learn something from you. And if you want to get a hold of us, M. Bailey at intelligentleadershipec.com, R. Barron at intelligentleadershipec.com, or richbarron.intelligentleadershipec.com. That was a mouthful.
Yeah.
It really was. But anyway, thank you so much, and I hope you enjoyed it today. And take care and be safe. We'll see you again.
Great seeing you again, Dirk.
Thank you, guys, and thank you to all the listeners out there.